stand. I need to let go. No, you don't wanna shine on through the hearts of man. I wanna reach out. I wanna stand up. I wanna let go. You don't. I wanna shine on in the hearts of man. I wanna reach out with the back of my broken hand. Another headache, another heartbreak. I'm so much older than I can take. Reflection, well, it comes and goes. I need direction to perfection. No, help me out. Here we go. Hi, guys. We're back on the case. How goes it out there in Twitch land? Hope it's going well. Hope everyone's ready for the second of, turns out, 2 presidential debates. Gotta say, I'm excited. Now that I've pushed through to the other side of the looking glass, and especially after I watched them both simultaneously during the town hall last week, which actually ended up being way less jarring and discombobulating than the first debate, because one, I had a bunch of other co-hosts who were talking, so that added, cognitive distortions, but just the fact that they were talking like at the same time, but without being aware of it, like without challenging one another, it really it gave it sort of like a soothing, like symphonic quality, because I was able to sort of pay attention to one or the other. Like I'd hear both, but if I looked at one of them, I could hear them more directly, and the other one kind of fell into the background. And so I could kind of pick. I could turn it into a Pixie song, and I could go for a nice a minute or so just listening to Joe, just this soft, grandfatherly senescence of Joe, just sounding like he's talking himself into dreamland. Sounds like he's waiting, and it sounds like he's waiting to get the Edward G. Robinson treatment from Soylent Green, and that's soothing. But it would get boring if I listened to the whole thing. So then I just look at Trump, and he's screaming at Samantha Guthrie about how we have the best, we're doing the best, we have the best test, we have more tests than anybody, and China, no, and it's like, boom. It's like loud, quiet, loud, and then you go back after that becomes too taxing, and you go back to Biden, and it's like soothing again. With them actually talking to each other and having like one conversation, I think it's going to be honestly more challenging to keep zen. But I think with my last couple of experiences, I've learned to just absorb the gestalt and just absorb sort of the noises, the sounds. Yeah, like a symphony. Like their voices are just instruments for aesthetic appreciation. They do not exist to communicate ideas or facts or policy or anything. Is there a more failed world leader in history than Benito Mussolini? That's an interesting question, because on the one hand, Mussolini is one of the great political entrepreneurs of the modern era. This is a guy who saw the writing on the wall in World War I, saw it as the death knell for like Marxian socialism as a meaningful political current, or at least a political current that could realistically take power in Europe after World War II, because they sure were headed towards that point when World War I happened and shattered everything, as we've talked about before on the streams. But a lot of socialists were left after World War II very bereft of like an understanding of how to move forward, and you saw them fall to bloody internal mayhem in Germany and elsewhere because no one knew what to do, especially after the Soviets won. But Mussolini looked at what was happening, said, what do we got here? We've got a left wing that's got this massive popular base, but is existentially feared by the powers that be in our society. And as we just saw, They're willing to do almost anything to prevent the left wing from taking power, including destroying Europe. Here we are. But what we got on the right? We've got a right wing movement that has obviously, or a reactionary, power base that has control of all the power within the society, but has basically no popular support among actual people, which in the modern era, in the new 20th century era of mass politics, is now necessary. So Mussolini said, well, we'll take the shit that gets people in the streets for the left and we'll just do it for the right. And in so doing, he helped create, he wasn't the only one who did it, but he was he was the first one, and Hitler was slavishly fixated on what Mussolini was doing. And the beer hall putsch was inspired by the March on Rome. He thought that the Nazis were in a position similar to what the black shirts were in 22 when they marched on Rome, and Mussolini was just given control of government by a cowed House of Savoy. And it failed miserably. They got the cops shot him, and he went to jail. Obviously not for too long. But anyway, that was a hell of an insight. That was a hell of a move. He's kind of like a Ray Kroc figure of politics. And I say all that with those terms because fascism needs to be understood first and foremost as this incredibly cynical attempt to create something that will work. It was a brand. It was a group of people in search of power who had branding that they knew worked. Like the kind of stuff that had emerged out of the push for socialism in Europe had created this thing that the public at large understood to mean opposition to the status quo and opposition to the powers that be, and the idea of a new and better world than the one we had, a progressive one. And he pulled what worked out of that and put it out there to prop up capitalism, basically. Not the old rulers, not the old people who ran capitalism necessarily, but capital in general, which meant that they were able to draw large numbers of people into their organization with the promise of redemptive violence, which people love, but without having to worry about really getting any kind of pushback from power. In fact, getting supported by power and getting huge checks, huge wheelbarrows of lira from the big landowners and the budding capitalists to break strikes and stop agricultural work stoppages. And it got him into power almost immediately. Look how long it took Hitler to get his shit together. Italy took power almost immediately, 1922. That's impressive. But then the problem with fascism is that it really does, it is predicated on imperial expansion. It's predicated on expanding its internal market through domination of new territory and new resources. Because of its resistance to the subsumption into any kind of global network of power. It's a philosophy of national supremacy, which meant that for Italy and I don't think it's a coincidence. Italy and Germany were the countries that had fascism, and they were also the countries that missed out because they weren't. They were late in being formed as nation states, as coherent nation states. They lost out on all the imperial spoils that had allowed capitalism to extend itself and extend its capacity beyond the locations of its original founding. But if they were going to maintain capitalism as the engine of their economy and resist the sort of corporate naked capital domination that leads to the social atomization and that you see in the advanced capitalist countries. So rather than do that, rather than strip that national character, you've got to grab some of that territory. And when they tried to do that, it didn't go very well. Ethiopia was honestly harder than it should have been, considering what the Ethiopian military was capable of, and they still used poison gas and shit. And then everything during World War II, really. Everything during World War II. He honestly might have helped save the Soviet Union because Operation Barbarossa had to be postponed because when it was originally supposed to happen, because against Hitler's pleas, Mussolini invaded Greece after taking Albania, and in so doing got his ass kicked so bad that Greeks were actually taking back parts of Albania, and so they had to divert forces to invade and conquer the Greeks, which throw the timetable off. And then, overthrown, taken away by Otto Skorzeny to live in Salo, to where he presumably ate poop, according to that movie. Then caught in a roadway, shot by a firing squad, hung up by his ankles at a gas station. That's pretty fail. That's pretty fail, but the only reason I can't give him a full fail grade is because he really was a guy who came from nowhere, you know? I think one of the definitions of fail, for me, that's most important is that a lot of it comes with just being of the generation that comes later, the generation that's had it happened for them already. The ones who are given the position of someone who has amassed a huge fortune or a huge amount of power in the world, but then had developed none of the traits that the person who had developed in the course of getting it. You know what I mean? Like the things that help you get somewhere are the things that help you stay there. And he didn't. And these guys, a fail person to me is someone who got the position, but had none of anything that like makes you worthy of the role. You know, in any meaningful sense. Obviously, you know, we're talking about even in capitalism, there is still a role for like skill and ability, and that's what capitalists like to point to as the thing that we're trying to reward with this system. But it's very, very small. What we mostly reward, what is vastly, vastly over rewarded, is luck, and not just like the luck to not have a brick fall on your head or, you know, get cancer or something, which is part of it, or get disabled in a specific way. That's all part of the luck. But the big part of the luck is being born into a position of already having assumed power. And we're being ruled right now by the copies of the copies of the copies who built this liberal meritocratic system. And so they have none of the abilities that are developed and chosen for through like the theoretical competitive architecture of capitalism or politics. So I think anybody who has really failed, they have to have, in some respect, some significant respect, fumbled the ball, dropped the bag, and Mussolini fucking made the bag in the first place. Fargo. People are asking about Fargo. 5 episodes in, very poor in my opinion. Very bad show. It's blunt. It's obvious in a way that it didn't used to be. Like, I kind of got bored with the way it would create these thematic and symbolic presents to be opened by reviewers. But I now realize that I kind of missed that compared to the just lack of any subtext. And I think that's because they're trying to address a social issue, which is not, I mean, the whole point of Fargo, right, is it's supposed to be a riff on the Coens, and the Coen universe, and the Coen worldview, and the Coen aesthetic, right? And I'm sorry, but that's not a big feature of it. It's like social awareness, you know? That's not really what they are interested in. And a movie and a series of shows that, like, don't really make sense, honestly, outside of that context. There's a reason that's called that, and there's a reason that they have all these, like, the plots and the setting and even the characters, they're all established by Coen brothers archetypes. And now they're making a season that's about, like, you know, the realities of race as it's lived in America, and I'm sorry, that's not something the Coens have ever really cared about. And as a result, you see just like the term paper mindset kick in, where it's like, we're going to give everybody a monologue about racism every episode, which is not something that the previous seasons had. But I will say, like, I don't think this is some huge drop in quality, because Fargo was always, like, clever but not fantastic, just because it was so, you know, fixated on, like, appealing to, you know, an idea of quality. And now I think the thing about this season is like, now that element, like having to have a racial or like a social awareness element to the plot, I think that's now here, not just as like some pander, but because, or not like a direct pander to like, oh, people are woke now, let's give them something that's woke, but just, you know, if a show really does seem to be in some way being driven by like the idea of what the critical response will be, then now I think in this current moment, everyone is aware that the new critical consensus has that, like, for a real work of art to mean anything in the popular culture, it has to speak to these questions. And if it doesn't, it is inferior. And I just don't think that's true. I disagree with that premise. Cabinet, somebody wants Biden cabinet predictions. I'm going to go with the Grimace for Secretary of State. I know you're going to think Hamburglar at Treasury. No, thank you. Hamburglar at Defense. No. I honestly don't get why people get riled up about any of the cabinet stuff. One, it's all just being leaked by specific staffers to make, like, to do some internal office politics bullshit. The way people read shit like that and just assume, oh, this is like the campaign telling us the truth, as opposed to this is some weasel in the campaign trying to position themselves for the post-campaign era. And, you know, that doesn't mean that it's not true, and it certainly wouldn't be surprising, but it's also not something that, one, first of all, we can even know means anything other than office politics and people jockeying for position, which, I mean, tells you something. But two, it doesn't fucking matter who's in the cabinet. It doesn't matter who's in the cabinet. We know how this fucking government will be run. We know because we actually saw a primary contest that had, like, meaningful stakes. And the party destroyed a number of its presiding institutional concepts, from Me Too to the Iowa caucus, and then killed their own fucking voters. And you can't give them you can't say that they're dumb like Trump when he denied the pandemic. They're the party of science, right? They listen to doctors, and they were telling people after the fucking lockdown started, go vote, don't worry about it, be a hero, do democracy. And if anyone said don't do it, they said, wow, the Sanders campaign bringing out the ugly history of voter intimidation and suppression, harkening back to the days before the Civil Rights Act, when minority Democrats were prevented from voting. And that's what Bernie Sanders and his gang of bulls Connor are trying to do. Like, that was a fight, and, like, they didn't want Biden. I think it's pretty clear when you see how wide the field was and how long it took that the last thing they wanted was to have this fucking fossil on top of the ticket. But they had no other options because the party faithful, broadly construed, didn't really have any preference among the heirs to the throne, because the Democratic Party has forgot how to appeal to actual voters. Like, look at what the Democratic electorate, and these are people who are Democrats. They accept so many of the premises of the Democratic Party. They're in fact basically enthralled to the Democratic Party because they will vote the way they're told to, which is what they ended up doing. But when they were forced to choose between a choice, like, they basically got a lineup. The DNC basically said, here's your choices, who do you want? And of course, Bernie was off the table. Bernie had his supporters. Bernie had his chunk of the electorate. And you know, he was working to try to expand that, mostly through reaching out to non-voters. Didn't work well enough, but that was the goal. Meanwhile, you've got the regular Democrats. These are the people who go in there and punch the ticket on the Dems every 4 years, every 2 years. These are people who don't believe a lot of the right-wing American knee-jerk slanders around the Democrat Party. Like, they don't think that they're eating babies. You know, they think that NAFTA might have had some bad effects, but in general, it made America better. You know, like, these people are not even like Trump-curious folks, right? These are solid Democrats. And presented with a next generation of people, a next generation to assume the mantle of the Obama-Clinton neoliberal Democratic Party, the DNC, the DLC mutant that emerged out of the 80s. In a post 2008 world, these are your options: Kamala, Buttigieg, Gillibrand, Biden, whatever. All of the new ones, all of the ones that were supposed to be the fresh face, got no influence, no real interest. Besides, of course, the freaks in Iowa and New Hampshire who specifically are fixated on the new and the fresh, and basically they see themselves as like focus groups, and they give themselves the self-satisfaction and seriousness of purpose of a focus group. Like, okay, this is going to determine the next year's new flavor of M&M. I have to make sure that it's a good one. Or like, oh my God, these chips, if they're bad, that's going to be my fault. Like, they think that way because of their first. Everyone else is actually trying to think of like who they want to beat, who they think could beat Trump, and who they'd actually like to see. And none of them caught fire at all. None of them got any real stick with any of those people. The only one who got any support was, as a default, Joe Biden, because he was the one most directly connected to Obama, who they actually liked and who they were really fond for. The guy who was able to successfully mask neoliberalism with a appeal, not like just to black Americans, but to like a whole segment of like college educated whites as well, that just disarmed them to any of his faults, and to the Democratic Party, not the Democratic Party's faults in general, which they have, fallen away from, but from the Democratic Party. And even though these are all people who they're all intersectional. They all know the language. They all know the language of this new, woke capitalism people talk about, that is the only thing that the Democrats are standing for at this point. And none of them could gain traction. None of them could. And when it came down to South Carolina, people say like Clyburn Clyburn sealed the fate of Bernie and guaranteed it for Biden when he endorsed him. I think that's in a sense true, but I don't think it's because Clyburn picked the Democrats and said, Biden, I want him. What happened was, it was getting down to the wire. None of the other people had any kind of support among his actual base in South Carolina. He didn't want to go like outside the lane and pick somebody that he knew people didn't like. Who did people still like? They still like Biden. Just give it to them. Like, that's what he knew. That he was connected enough to his own constituents to know that Biden's the guy that people like, because they think it relates to they remind him of Obama, and they think that because they think he's a safe choice, so you can win. And that's because they don't know his brain is gone, like everyone in the Democratic Party does. So Clyburn was forced. I'm either gonna keep my mouth shut until election day, and then I've lost my power because who needs me for anything, or I'm gonna ratify the decision of my supporters or my constituents by saying Biden, and then getting everybody in South Carolina to rally around that, which is what happened, because South Carolina was not just huge margins in the black community. It was a huge surge in white suburban turnout for Democratic primary. It was a revolution against Bernie, which until that point they had been stymied by the fact that none of these people looked good. But Biden also didn't look good, and for another reason. It's like different groups had different awarenesses of the different problems of the other candidates. And so Biden was the last choice. And I'm saying all this just to say they didn't do this for nothing. They did this to hold power. Look at what they did with the fucking platform, where they could have said anything because everyone knows the platform doesn't mean anything. They still made sure there was nothing in the platform about universal health care or fucking Israel or anything hot button. They didn't give the Democrats any the base, the leftists, the Bernie-crats. They didn't give them anything because they didn't have to. They saw the measure of their opponent. They were able to defeat them, which means they don't fear them anymore. Which is why I keep saying there is no left stake in this election from the standpoint of like doing anything in a Biden presidency. There is no pushing him left. There is no having them like somehow recognize the worth of having the left as a part of the coalition. The fight has been lost at that point. Like we're already in the aftermath of the defeat. Like Bernie was the effort. It was to hollow out the Democratic Party from within. Like one of those wasps who like bore into the head of a grasshopper or something and lay eggs. Like if you want to vote for Biden, do it for whatever like harm reduction reason makes sense to you, even though none of that makes sense to me at all. I don't think we're reducing dick. But for God's sake, don't do it thinking that the left has anything to do with it. And by the way, same thing goes for saying, no, I'm not going to vote, or I'm going to vote for a party, or I'm going to vote for Trump as the ultimate own. That's not going to matter either. Because if they lose, they're still in charge, and they get to blame you for not coming out. If they win, they get to take you for granted again. But honestly, I've been thinking about it, and like the entire liberal argument that they use for making the left vote is, in my opinion, basically incoherent. Like from just a moral perspective. Tell me if you think this is crazy, but like they say, a vote for anybody but Biden is essentially a vote for Trump. And of course, that only makes sense if the underlying assumption is that that person would be voting for Biden, or should be voting for Biden, and more importantly than should, because technically, shouldn't everybody be voting for Biden? Shouldn't even Trump supporters be voting for Biden? Why are only leftists the ones whose failure to vote for Biden is the cause for them to be the reason that he lost? And it's because they say no, but those Trump people they are bad. They're either stupid or evil. You know better. But see, that's twining different types of knowledge into one thing. Like what they're referring to is the fact that you have a similar understanding to the liberal about the need for things like anti-racism or civic equality, economic egalitarianism, even. Because the liberal will insist that they're just as socialist as you, they just know it's realistic. And they say, we both want these things. You want those things. Then by not voting for Biden, you are voting for Trump. But the thing is that there's another level beyond just that common understanding. It's, all right, we have these values. How do we enact them? And that is a tactical question that is separate from the question of whether or not you have a similar understanding of what the political good is. How do you achieve it? That's the whole thing. That's the actual point of argument, and they elide it completely to assume it within the greater moral imperative for you to vote. And I would say that if you look at voting as it really is, not as we fantastically imagine it to be, as for you, not as a general thing, but as you as a person sitting in a voting booth, what it is a expression of a preference for government, right? So if like you're saying the person has to vote because like everyone should vote, basically the Kantian imperative of do what you want everyone to do. Like in a political realm, you should behave the way you want everyone to behave. And it's like, yeah, then you want people to participate, because otherwise then you just have some sort of dictatorship. You'd have to. If people aren't going to participate in a punitive democracy, you don't have one. So yes, you should vote. But then you should vote. But then the next, but within that is, who are you voting for? Because you are doing an act of individual moral reasoning. You got to remember that you're not coordinating activity. We pretend that voting is a collective endeavor instead of 100 million individual ones to elide this fact. But this is fun. Like when reasoning about it, if I don't know what anyone else is gonna do, really, beyond like maybe the circle of my close friends and like what I see in fucking polls, then I just have to act from what I think should be done. And so then the imperative is not to just vote; it's to vote your conscience, which means vote for a third party of your choice or write in somebody. Because if everyone voted for that person, you'd have something good. If everyone voted for who you're voting for, then you'd have a great outcome. I mean, if anything, that's an argument not to vote ironically. To, like, if you're not going to vote for Biden, vote earnestly for a third-party person of your choice, or write in Bernie or something. But it's not an argument about who to vote for. That's separate. That's about tactics. And it's also about your understanding of what the parties mean and what Biden's presidency would mean. Because there's plenty of evidence that a Biden presidency will... You can't say, like, it's going to be not as bad as Trump in a broad sense, but once again, like, what does bad mean? But it will definitely be a further development of terrible, terrible processes. It will not be interrupting, but rather accelerating the worst things that are happening in our political and economic system. And even there, who to vote for is up to you. You got to thread that needle. But it's not this open and shut case, because the open and shut case is buried down here in, like, the moral argument about, like, a mutual understanding of, like, rights-based humanity and equality. Even though, if you really are, if they really are a lib and someone really does have deeply felt socialist priors, there's not even an agreement there, because the idea of what constitutes rights and freedom is different. But say at, like, that level, not as deep as where the conflict begins, and not as shallow as where it comes back tactically, there's an agreement. But that's just like one thin slice of agreement. And they turn it into a moral imperative to go along with their horseshit. And I say, at this point, I just want to see something funny happen. Trump talking about how he wanted to kiss all the guys for a couple days while he was jacked up on steroids, that was pretty fun. That was funny. Someone says, we need to stop moralizing about everything 24 hours a day. Holy shit. If I see one fundamental flaw, like beyond obviously the nature of online political argumentation, I would say that, the specific expression of that, like the category error that occurs, that is generated by online argumentation and like the structures of it, is the constant turning of every question into a moral one. Every question is a question of, like, essence, like a good or bad. Is this act good or bad? Is this person good or bad? And those questions are unsolvable by definition, because unbeknownst to the people making them, they're making them just to have something to do. They're arguments that are made to be had. Who is the moralist's favorite president? Jimmy fucking Carter. Absolutely. Carter absolutely was a moralist first and foremost. a earnest one. I would argue that Jimmy Carter, like, he has had a virtuous post-war, post-presidential life. I would not argue that point at all. Compared to the other ones, my God, it's not even close. And that kind of gives people this idea of like, well, he couldn't have been that bad of a president because he is a better man than most presidents. And the thing is, yes, he is a better man, I would say, in some sort of soul measuring contest with the other presidents, he would win. But that very fact, in the context of his presidency, is what made him such a uniquely terrible president. Because he was absorbing all of this essentially reactionary economic propaganda and turning it into like the firmament, like the actual structure of reality, and then reasoning morally from within that constraint, which as president of the United States, I'm sorry, he should not be doing. Unless he wants to reify all of the worst emergent ideas within capitalism and the worst tendencies. And he did what he did, like try to bring about a recession on purpose. Somebody said that like, well, Volcker did a lot of it with the interest rate hike, and that wasn't, that's technically not Carter because he's, appointing somebody. First of all, that's bullshit. The Federal Reserve is just like the Supreme Court. It is a political institution that is designed to look like it's somehow independent of the political process, and it's all a collectively agreed upon lie that we maintain in order to prop up the system. Which is why John Roberts is the smartest Republican on earth, and why every Republican who yells at John Roberts really proves that he's either playing to the base or he's a moron. Because Roberts, for example, joined the liberals in a Pennsylvania case about a lower court ruling to stop the Republicans from preventing mail-in ballots from going out 3 days before the election. And some Republicans are genuinely pissed about this. They do not understand, or they don't want to understand, or they don't care, I guess, that Roberts understands that these things being perceived as independent institutions is what maintains their persistent power in American politics. If they did not have that, they would eventually be attacked by the political system. If everyone understood them, if there was a collective understanding that these things were not independent of politics, if there was not a taboo against politicizing them, they would be immediate. That's what the Republicans are saying. We're going to put more guys in the Supreme Court, and then they're going to add guys to the Supreme Court. Like, if you're me, I go, who cares? So what? Liberals, Democrats understand that that's a genuine threat. That's scary, because if that were to happen, it would politicize the Supreme Court in a way that would render it no longer usable as a backstop to prevent real, left-wing government control or exertion of control. Because you can't point to the ref and say, it's not me, it's the ref, if the ref has if the ref is understood to be Tim Donaghy, for example. And so Roberts understands that if the court's going to be around to do things like stop a Green New Deal from happening with legislation, or more likely than anything, prevent universal health care from coming into being, or just like further stripping voting rights away, especially if the left becomes ascendant. That's only going to be possible if there's enough political cost associated with attacking the Supreme Court to prevent it from being carried out, or more importantly, to prevent the base from demanding it be carried out. Like right now, the thing that allows Democrats to play possum with the Supreme Court is the knowledge that there's really nothing their base is going to do about it. They don't fucking care. Or more importantly, even though they are horribly angry and awful and feel terrible about this whole, they have absorbed the Democratic ideology that there's nothing to be done because the Supreme Court has to be protected from politicization. If that perception goes away, it becomes inevitable over time that there'll be pressure on the court as an institution. And he wants to prevent that from happening, and doing things like joining the liberals, especially on things that they really care about. And right now what they care about more than anything is making sure that this election does not turn into 2000 again. That's buying him good boy points for the next ruling. But anyway, this is all a big digression to say that Carter thought he was reasoning in this reality that was actually a pseudo-reality that was being projected to him by this new post-Keynesian austerity economics that said that the thing that was driving, that the only way to solve inflation and to get the economy back on track was to break the back of working class power, and essentially end the continual rise of the workers' labor share of now dwindling profits, instead of, I don't know, taking those profits from the ownership side. That wasn't on the table. And so when he told people, wear a sweater and, you know, turn down the thermostat, and we're going to stop you from being able to fucking borrow money. Like, this is what I was saying when I was talking about the Volcker shock. It wasn't just Volcker. He wasn't just applying Volcker. It was he didn't do wage and price controls, he did credit controls, where in the second half of his term, he reduced the amount of money that could be lent to people at the retail level. That's the kind of thing that will basically force a recession to happen. They were doing it on purpose, and he was doing it out of virtue. He was going to wean America off excess on behalf of virtue. Not capitalism, but virtue. So yeah, moral questions. At this point, what is the point of it other than entertainment? How about some questions of efficacy? How about some questions of usefulness and effectiveness? And I know that these are not totally removable, but I find that any actual tactical questions get turned into moral questions almost immediately. And then it is insisted, no, we have to solve this moral question and decide who's right between these two sides on this moral issue before we can progress, because then we're going to be using the master's tools or some bullshit. And my answer to that is just, these differences you think you have are unresolvable and beside the point. Because, you know, the rightness of the morality, honestly, a lot of it will be revealed in the course of who is arguing in good faith and with an eye towards, like, reality. Those are the kind of things that suggest to you who is more connected to reality and more likely to be able to conceive of and pursue effective action. Is it that easy to remove your choice from voting ironically from the effect that not having Trump in office has on many Americans? Well, for one thing, I don't know what that effect is going to be. People say that, but what does it really mean? What do you really mean by that is my question, I guess. And I would like people to list this. What realistically do they think, what persistent pain are we going to see removed from America by Biden being president instead of Trump? I'm not talking about anything in terms of, norms or even things of normalizing and all that stuff. Because, yes, that might be true, but it's a little pie in the sky. I'm talking about actual conditions. I mean, do you think that they're just going to open up all those cages for the kids and just let them out? And do you think that's going to happen? I don't think that's going to happen. Now, yes, I would say one group, visa holders or people seeking visas. Absolutely, 100%. I agree that there will be a immediate boot off of your neck, for sure. I'm not like saying there is none. I'm trying to run through what they actually are. So that's one for sure. Visa holders in general. But other than that, like, people who are here illegally, there might be fewer ICE raids and stuff, but, like, deportation's still going to happen. ICE is still going to be there. Environment, I mean, what does Biden want to really do? What does Biden really want to do that's that different from what Trump's doing? Maybe he might close off a few public lands to drilling, which is good. But once again, like, in a broader sense, have we decelerated any trends significantly? And, like, the big one, people want to talk about authoritarianism, but I'm sorry. with this fucking Whitmer kidnapping plot and a response to it, I mean, I don't see some sort of ratcheting down of authoritarian like excess in the Biden term. If anything, what you might see is sort of like a war on terror, war on domestic terror, like where the Whitmer plot becomes a model for like a newly anti-fascist federal law enforcement mechanism, like a Antifa, DHS, and FBI that's going to maintain popular support by reminding people of how many Nazis are under the bed. And even if they don't do that, there's going to be plenty of blame to go around enough to allow sort of the current authoritarian moment to continue essentially unchallenged. Like these Democratic mayors who send in squads of psycho cops to gas everybody, they're not going to act any differently with Biden's in charge, and Biden's not going to put any real pressure on them. But again, these questions are secondary because none of you are going to determine the outcome of this. You pressing a button doesn't make it happen. You going in and voting for Biden doesn't mean that when Biden's in, you're responsible that he's in there, and therefore responsible for all the lives that were saved. Or if you don't vote for Biden, you're responsible for all the extra deaths and misery. That's not true. Why is voting for Bernie a collective political act, but voting for Biden can't be? Because Bernie represented a coherent challenge to the Democratic Party as such from within. And you had to accept certain premises that differed from fundamental Democratic policy agendas and tactical understandings and doctrine in order to vote for Bernie. And that wouldn't mean that you're going to now become a diehard. You're not going to, but it's going to mean that your voting is, it's not just for one candidate, it is for a coherent political project. The Democratic candidate who emerged from that fucking primary after defeating Bernie has no such, there's no coherence behind the vote against it. It's everyone from embarrassed suburban Republicans to Antifa. And who the hell do you think is going to get the actual influence in that campaign? Or, I mean, in that presidency? That's another way you can tell the really dumb conservatives are the ones who actually believe that Biden is like in thrall to Antifa or whatever the fuck. Like there was some dumb thing from that nitwit Weinstein brother and fucking Conceptual James today about involuntary conservatives, about people who will accept all the horrible ideas that, yes, we understand 100% how terrible Trump is. We are reality-based. We understand that Trump is awful and that he lies and that he is a fraud and a criminal and all this stuff. Because to not honestly, like educated people understand that to not at least recognize Trump's manifest and manifold failures as a human and as a fucking president and as everything requires a certain glassy-eyed mania to you. It requires you to be in the thrall of MAGA to some degree. To a degree that is reality warping outside of the accepted level of warp you're allowed in polite company. So you got to think of some other reason. And the one these guys have cooked up is that I can't vote for Biden because look at these guys saying abolish the Constitution and court pack and enforce anti-racism at the barrel of a gun. And that is a result of someone being a moron and also just looking at Twitter all day and thinking it's real life. Because if you can't look at the actual dynamics of the party and what has happened in the last year and see that there is no actual influence from that part of whoever ends up voting for the Democrats on Biden, on the DNC, on the party in general, you are as self-hypnotized as a Q person. I'm sorry, I don't care if you want to think you're smarter than them, but you're basically not. If you could look at the world and look at the Democratic Party and say, yeah, you know, Biden, he's a puppet for the fucking for what, the new Black Panther Party or whatever the fuck. I mean, now when you want to talk at the level of like language, yeah, I can't wait to see how hilariously woke Biden tries to be. Like, obviously, they're going to use Kamala for most of it, but there's going to, all the language, all the academic anti-racism language is going to come out. It's going to be horrifying. And I welcome it because, you know, I think it'll be an alienating moment for a lot of people to just see the wildly cynical use of their language, and they're going to be left with a choice. Like, do I accept the reality that this stuff really at this point is just a cudgel for the establishment, or do I realize that it has to be transcended? And I mean, I'm not saying everybody's going to choose the right choice there, but I think some people will, and I welcome that as a possible good outcome of Biden being in there. But anyway, there will be no practical changes. No policies are going to be enforced to make your life. They're not going to fucking blow up the Constitution or the Supreme Court. I was just talking about how they need to reinforce the public. They need to what they're going to be doing in there is taking every institution that Trump undermined by treating it like it was, because Trump went in there like a child and he didn't understand that he's supposed to be upholding the kayfabe, that no, these institutions are not independent, these institutions are not political. He just went in there and just was like, yeah, no, these guys all work for me, right? FBI director works for me, Supreme Court work for me, these guys are I'm on The Apprentice and these are my employees. In reality, yeah, like at this point, the Constitution plus 250 years of governmental expansion and complication, all of it being concentrated in one executive office that is the combination of head of state and government for some stupid fucking reason. In reality, all of these things that were supposed to be checks on presidency are not just extensions of presidential power. Especially, and then if the party that the president in a partisan political environment where there's two coherent parties with like different agendas that supersede any kind of investment in an institution that they might be a part of, that means that if you control the legislative, they essentially work for you too. And he treated everybody that way. And Democrats have spent 4 years freaking out because we're not supposed to realize that. We're not supposed to know that. We're supposed to think that, no, these things are independent. These things are checks on both sides so that they can be used when they need to be used. And when you get a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court and you're the Democrats, my God, that is a gift to you. Now we have a guaranteed excuse for why we can never follow through on anything that our base wants and has a delusion in their mind that we actually have any interest in pursuing. And so when he gets in there, Biden is going to just be like fucking Fix-It Felix from Wreck-It Ralph, just going around and putting back all of these institutions, building up their independence from the executive. And that means they're not going to fucking monkey with the Constitution. They're not going to add any seats to the Supreme Court. And if you think they are, you're a fucking moron. And you've just stared into the abyss of the online for so long that you've turned the fucking random hooting of a bunch of just cope-addicted pseudo-radicals who spend their days online cosplaying a political revolution that they know in their heart will never happen, and then say, yeah, these guys actually control the Democratic Party. Wait a minute. All right, this is interesting. Your argument is forget about the visa holders, forget about the COVID victims, forget about women and minorities. I need to wax ambivalent about voters to self-soothe about the Bernie loss. Once again, I don't get what that has to do with my vote. I am not determining any of that. My vote, and even what I say on the stream, will not determine that outcome. And I keep banging that drum because these ritualized pseudo performances of political power have to be broken down. And that means voting as like the locus of political meaning and moral expression, and also posting. because they're just different manifestations of the same phenomenon of just this shadow politics. No, voting for no, that's different. If you don't get why it's different, it's not for you. And nothing in this world is. Remember that one? All right, what is it? It's almost time. Maybe one question before I go. Voting less than posting, less than podcasting. I would say voting will be one step closer than either podcasting or voting to real politics, because it does contribute to an event that has an actual impact on something. I will say that, but it's just one level more advanced. It's just one level removed. And the thing is, there's an accelerationist case for Biden too. Like, there's all these guys out there who've decided that their form of cope is, I'm actually voting for Trump because he's the real challenge to the status quo or whatever. It's like that. You're just trying to wring some meaning out of this, and some sense that you're not owned. Sorry, everyone's fucking owned in this. We've all been owned. There's no way out of owning. There's no vote you can do. There's nothing you can have in your head while you're pressing the button that's going to un-own you in this election. We are fully owned. If voting isn't meaningful, then running for office isn't either. I didn't say it's not meaningful. I'm saying that its meaning is not in proportion to the way that people talk about it, to the amount of psychic resources that it kicks up, the amount of people's political identity it composes. And I'd say running for office would be one more step closer to real action than voting. But once again, at that point come the questions of like tactics and feasibility. If you're going to run for something, why? Is it to get out of the house? Do you have an actual thing to contribute beyond I've read the posts and I have the good politics from the good posts? Is there something about you specifically that positions you well to present a socialist alternative in a plausible electoral context? Like, it's a stack. Like, political identity is the stack of actions, that go from thinking having certain things that you think of as ideas, to expressing those ideas to the people around you, expressing them online in different formats, then expressing them through actions like, organizing a union at your work if that's viable, or running for office, or whatever, or voting, whatever. Those are actions. And our understanding of ourselves is like pursuing political goals, embodying political ideas, is some percentage of those things. And all I am saying is that voting is this gigantic thing in people's self-conceptions around it. And as long as it is, it's just going to rob you of the fuel to really pursue anything that might be more close to the ground and more consistent. Like a daily use of power that goes beyond just thinking things and expressing them online. A daily pressing against the accumulated horrors around us. Living a political life. Living political ideas. And voting, not saying that wouldn't be part of that. This isn't either or, it's yes and. It's adding things to your understanding of what it takes to be, what it really means to be a political subject. And the only way you can do that is if you have to make room for other things. And I'd say the thing to kick out, first of all, the thing to dump off the fucking the hot air balloon to lighten the load is your understanding of the moral weight around the issue of voting. Beyond that, Like when people say, what do you, okay, well, log off. What do you do? That's up to you. You have to make that decision based on your own world and your own life and your own understanding of your world and your life. I can say vote as part of a political expression. Then, though, who to vote for? Same thing. You got to make that choice. All right, guys. I'm going to log off here. It's amazing. I'm going to likely... The fake news media is going to smear me again after this about what he said about voting. But it really does seem like there's like a conscious decision to not hear what I'm fucking saying. Maybe I'm not expressing myself clearly, and that's very possible. I am just going off the fucking top of my head. But I really do feel like the responses I get from people to when I try to explain this stuff, it does seem like they're trying not to get what I'm saying. All right, I'm logging off. Bye-bye.